Hello, I'm Vass, and welcome to my tutorial on extracting a foreground subject from a background in Photoshop. In other words, I will be displaying how to prepare a photo to be placed on a new background. We'll be covering the steps to select and mask, as well as the majority of the modes and tools in the masking mode. And we'll briefly discuss further applications and techniques you can experiment with afterwards. So without further ado, let's dive in. For this tutorial, I'm using Photoshop CC on my MacBook, but the basic principles and features can be applied to older versions. So I've already downloaded my file from Adobe Stock. I'll provide the link for the Adobe Stock image that I'm using down below, but feel free to check out their other resources. They do have a lot of great high quality photos that are great if you don't have your own to work with, but feel free to follow along with your own image. So to start off, you're going to go into File, and then Open, and it'll open up your computer dialog box where you can find your file, and then go ahead and open that. And before we go on, I should mention that we are in the Essential workspace, which is the default, so it's likely that your program will already be open up to this, but if your workspace is looking different than mine, this is how to switch it. Now we're going to go over to the toolbar, and so now if we take a look at our toolbar here, we have a magic wand tool in the quick selection pane. The magic wand tool will select all of the tones that it finds in the image that are the same as what you had just clicked. And if you do hold shift, it will select several tones. And this is primarily effective for objects or subjects that are one-toned or very similar toned. However, as you can see, it's not too effective for the image we're working with here. So we're just going to deselect or Command D and start over. So if you go back to the magic wand and hold that down with the left key, you'll get an option to get the quick selection tool, and that's what we're going to use. The selection tool works pretty similar to the brush. So if we take a look at the top here, so the plus brush will be selecting and adding to the area, and then the minus will be subtracting and taking away from it. And then for brush size, you can adjust it here in the top, or you can also use the square bracket keys. We will also need to use the zoom tool to make a more accurate selection, which can be accessed down here at the bottom of the toolbar or by clicking Z. And then when that's selected, you can just click and it will zoom in at a set percentage each time you click. And then if you're working on a Mac, you can use your mouse pad gestures to zoom in or out. And I find this the most simple way. So now using the selection tool, we can start to make the selection. Begin by clicking on areas that you want to keep. If you accidentally go out of bounds on your selection, it's an easy fix. You can just hold down Option, or you can click at the top to switch back to the subtract and click to remove the extra area you don't want. You can also hold and drag when selecting, and this will basically tell the system that everything that is between the tones of the first point and the second point needs to be selected. So it will select a larger area at once. Now that we've selected that, we can go ahead to the top and click the Select and Mask, and this will take us to the Select and Mask workspace. Now that we're in the masking space, we're no longer going to see the dotted outline. Instead, we will see the object that's selected at 100 opacity and then the background at something else, which can be adjusted as I'm about to show you. So the background is dependent on the view mode, how we view it. So if we click on the View drop-down menu, we can see a few options. Right now we're seeing the onion skin mode, which is showing us the background at 50% opacity while the object is at 100. Some other useful ones will be on black and on white, and that just simply means the background will be black or white. And then here we'll just need to turn up the opacity to fully see the effect. I find that for this image, the black will probably be the most useful. Another mode worth mentioning is the overlay, and with this you can select a color, and then the same as the previous ones, you can alter the opacity. And then you can also alter the indicator, meaning you can select the selected areas or the masked areas to view. As you can see, the selected areas mode is not going to be very useful for us. It's a lot easier to see the masked area in this image. So now let's quickly go over all the tools in the left-hand side. First, we have the quick selection tool, which works the same as your regular toolbar. We'll skip over the refine edge brush tool for now, and then we have the brush tool, which will let you get into smaller edges and more refined lines. The same as the quick selection tool, you can hold down Option and it will give you the subtract version of the brush, or you can just click it at the top. So it is continuously subtracting for you. Now, I'm realizing this area is going to be a little hard to take out with just the brush, so we can continue on and go into the lasso tool. And same as before, you can hold down to get your options of the tool. So the polygonal lasso will provide you with very sharp edges, whereas the regular lasso will give you a rounded edge.
we'll try the polygonal here. So when you're using this tool, you want to click down at each point, and then once it's all selected, the polygon is complete, the area will disappear. And I realized that I used the adding, not the subtracting option, and that's why I turned white instead of blue. So at the top, you can click the middle bar, and it will allow you to subtract the areas instead of add. And then the hand tool you can use to click and drag to move around the image. And then again, we have the zoom down here, which we've already gone over. So now I'm going to speed this up, and using the quick selection, the brush, and perhaps the lasso, I'll finish off selecting our foreground. And I'm actually going to switch back to the onion skin because it's a bit difficult for me on the overlay, and turn up the transparency. I find the onion skin to be very useful, especially if you're working with semi-transparent or light hair. And you can see that towards the end, I'm just clicking because I'm being very careful about what I want selected. Now that we have a pretty good selection, we can get into the right-hand side of things. So to start off, we're going to talk about radius, which is under edge detection. This is pretty difficult to see, so I'm going to enable the show edge. And as you can see here, you can just click it at the top. The radius is basically the outline and the sharpness of the outline of our selection. It will be grayed out if you don't have the edge refinement tool selected. So a thin outline basically means a sharp edge, and then a thicker outline means a softer edge. And then we can enable Smart Radius, which will alter our line to be thinner in some places and thicker in others. So it's basically just automatically detecting what parts are sharp and soft in our foreground. And I'm not going to focus too much on the radius, so we're going to move on to global refinements down here. And before we begin, we're going to switch to the black and white mode, which will just show you the figures as completely solid tone, either white for the selected area or black for unselected. Now let's look at the global refinements. So what smooth does, it will simply smooth the edges of your selection. You can slide it around to see what works best for you. It will take some getting used to figure out what works for what kind of image in the refinements. And then next we have feather, which will soften or blur the edge, and you can see it has quite a larger range than just the smooth, and it becomes quite blurry quite fast. I'm just going to set these back to 0 and then revisit them. And then contrast will make dark pixels black and light pixels white, meaning it'll create a sharper edge. And shift edge basically moves in your edge inwards or outwards, so it'll either be adding to or eating away at your foreground. And finally, let's discuss the edge refinement brush tool. When you drag it over, you're telling the system to reconsider where the outline falls. This is particularly effective for fur or hair. So here I've just dragged it over the hair, and you can see that it has defined the edge a little better. Now you're just going to set the output settings to layer mask and then click OK. And you can see here we have a pretty good selection on just a transparent background. And this image is ready to be used with any other background. Now to actually make the image blend well with your background image, you're going to have to do a bit more work. You're going to have to consider how the color integrates between the foreground and the background. For example, a flat white wall would produce a very different light than a natural landscape. Because the techniques vary depending on the effect you're trying to achieve, they're beyond the scope of this lesson. I have attached some resources below for different kinds of backgrounds you may be wanting to achieve, so go ahead and experiment with those. And that concludes our tutorial. Thanks for joining me. And if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments below, and I'll try my best to get